and Kraken crew to Season 1, Episode 3 of the-rink.com's Kraken Hostile Rinkcast, live from the puckhockey.com studios in the quarantine bubble. That's puckhcky.com. They've been our sponsors from the beginning on all of our divisions. We're going to be releasing some new rinkware there with some more logos for each of our divisions coming up soon. So keep an eye out for that. But always support our founding sponsors, which is and partners, puckhockey.com. Head over there. They got a bunch of new stuff, a bunch of new Metallica stuff they just released. So if you're a metalhead like I am, that's going to really hit the sweet spot for you. So, but they do have some Snoop Dogg stuff over there, and you can't forget about that because that's some slick stuff too. So anyway, today is Wednesday, February 10th, 2021. I am your host, Jeff Osborn, aka Gatekeeper and Puck and Hostile on the Twitters.
Y'all need to take a hit of this Jeffrey. It'll calm you down.
And today, I have Sean Fitgerald from our Chicago division here. He wants to talk a little bit of Kraken stuff. He's wearing a Kraken hat. You guys can't see it, but he is wearing a Kraken hat. Welcome, Sean.
Thank you. Yeah, I love the Kraken logo. I've got the American Needle hat. I'm definitely, I think, going to add the 47 hat, and I have a Kraken long sleeve already. So I'm appareled up.
Yeah, I got a bunch of Kraken stuff for Christmas. My wife went out and got me a bunch of Kraken stuff. So
yeah, we did lists this year, and I got a bunch of Kraken stuff because I'm like, I love that logo. I want more of it. So
I found, I think, was it here in the back of a Target in Chicago, in the west suburbs of Chicago. I found a Kraken shirt, which I couldn't believe.
Awesome.
Yeah. So I had to buy it for myself. So anyway, on to our guest. Today we have from The Athletic, we have Ryan Clark, who is moved on from the Colorado Avs beat over to the Seattle Kraken beat. And he's going to be the big expert for the Kraken this year. So Ryan, welcome.
Thank you. I don't know about big expert, but we'll see what we can do.
Awesome. That's cool. So, well, there's not a whole lot going on with the team or anything like that, but I think fans need to get familiar with us. Fans need to get familiar with you because you're putting out the most content right now as far as the Kraken stuff goes. At least when something interesting happens, which hasn't been a whole lot lately, but I think some stuff's going to start coming up because as Sean and I were talking in the pre-chat, they're going to need a coach at some point in time, and you think they're going to want a coach maybe before they pick their team. So that's not too far down the road. So.
No, it's not. I mean, I think that's just kind of the funny thing with this team is everyone's looking to see when are they going to do X, do Y, and do Z. And I know it's easy for some to say, well, what did Vegas or the last expansion team before Vegas do? And it's like, well, here's the thing. We're mired in a pandemic where, as we've seen, this has impacted what teams do financially more than ever before. So, will there be a coaching carousel? Will things be status quo? And those are all important items to consider going forward if you're the Seattle Kraken.
Mm-hmm. For sure. And one of the things that I really liked about the team and the organization when they announced they were going to have a team, I'm a big fan of Seattle, like the city. My wife and I went there for our 10th anniversary. We wanted to pick a place that we'd heard great things about. And that was kind of off the beaten path. You could do the typical Mexico thing and all that other stuff, but we wanted to pick some place we'd heard that was really, a great city that's kind of off the beaten path that everyone doesn't really go to. So we picked Seattle, and we spent, a nice long weekend in Seattle. It was the first time that we were ever there, and we fell in love with the city. Absolutely fell in love with the city. And I was like, our Airbnb that we had overlooked the stadium. And I'm like, that's where the Seattle Supersonics played and stuff. And I'm like, if they ever get a hockey team, which I hope they do, that's where they're going to play right there. And here we are a couple of years later, and they're going to have a hockey team starting next fall. So anyway, I wanted to get back to you a little bit. And there's some misconceptions. We kind of joked about this in the pre-chat, but what is your background as far as Seattle goes? Because a lot of people even I had the impression that you're actually from Seattle, or you grew up in Seattle or were born in Seattle. So give us a little bit of your background.
Yeah, sure. So the thing is, I grew up on the East Coast. The thing is, I've moved 32 or 33 different times. So my dad was military. And so between my dad's military career, my schooling as well as just my career. That's why so many moves. That's been as everything is small, from dorm room moves to moving from Florida to Washington when we moved to Seattle the first time. And so what it is I covered the Washington Huskies, believe it or not, for only 6 months for the Tacoma News Tribune before I joined the Athletic to cover the Avalanche. And so the entire time, people were like, hey, how would you feel about going back to Seattle and all that? And then when the announcement came that I was going to move back to cover the Kraken while being a national reporter for the Athletic, people were like, oh my God, he's coming home and it's a homecoming. And it's like, Ryan, what's it like for you to be back where you grew up? And it's like, I'm actually not from Seattle. And so from it has led to like some really seriously like horrible inside jokes with like my wife and I, where we'll drive around the city and I'll be like, yeah, there goes, well, now T-Mobile, but it's like, there goes Safeco Field. Like my dad took me there as a kid all the time. And, here's where the Kingdome was. And my mom was pissed when they blew it up because that's where her and my dad dated and met. And they went to Dick's for, dinner right after. So like we have fun with it, but no, I'm an East Coaster, but like, it's one of those things where people act and treat it as if I'm from here. And honestly, that's perfectly fine with us, just because I think when my wife and I lived here the first time, like we'd already knew a lot about Seattle and we loved it, and leaving was very hard. But to be back, it's like you notice little things now that you've been gone, but at the same time, it's the sort of city where it's like it felt like it never changed in some good way.
Yeah, it is. It's a great city, and I'm really happy for everything that's going on there. So I wish I was there locally to cheer for the team. Unfortunately, I'm from Chicago, but not unfortunately, but unfortunate for my newfound fandom with the Seattle Kraken. I am from Chicago, but I'm hoping to get out there with the game start and see the Hawks play or see anyone play. Out there, I would be more than happy to see any hockey game there in Seattle. So. Sean, how about you? You tell me about your fandom of the Kraken, because I know you've got some Kraken gear and you're kind of a closet Kraken guy yourself.
So I was I've always pondered, like, what if Seattle had a hockey team? Just like after the Supersonics left town, I was crushed that the Supersonics left town, and I was like, okay, if they don't have a basketball team, why not a hockey team? Like it makes perfect sense. I'd heard for years that they were thinking about going back to Seattle. And I had some friends who've gone out there and they've seen Safeco and they thought it was just amazing, and just how the environment, and they thought that Seattle would be like one of the perfect places to have a hockey team. So when any new like logo or something, I'm a big hat guy. I love hats.
No, you don't say.
I know. The running joke is I wear a different hat on every podcast I'm on, or at least on the Chicago one. And we've done 6 or 7 episodes, and I have hundreds of hats. So when the Kraken logos came out and stuff like that, I was all on board. I was like, yes, this is what I want. And I made my list, and the hat I'm wearing, I've got the primary logo and the alternate logo on it. And I was all in at that point. And so my wife and I also are big sports fans, and we love, like, after COVID, we've decided that we're going to travel one trip a year to a different sports venue in a different city. So Seattle is definitely on our list, and we'd like to hopefully go at a time where we definitely want to see the Kraken play. And then if the Mariners are done or something like that, at least we can take a tour of Safeco. Because the next hat on my list that I want is the classic blue with the yellow trident on it from Seattle, the Mariners. So that's just kind of inspired my Kraken lust, if you will.
It is really a cool city. I can't say enough good things about it. I mean, a lot of people that are going to listen to this, are from Seattle. But I could just gush on and on. We had just such a blast. We were there in February, the beginning of February, like this time of year in Seattle. And it was like, in the 50s. They had a snowstorm the day we showed up, and they got like 2 inches of snow, and it threw the city into chaos for like a day. And then after that, it was just, there was some rain. There was a lot of rain, of course, because Seattle. And, but it was, nice weather, and it was really nice, really, really nice. So, well, so further getting kind of back to the team and kind of focusing a little bit on the team. The thing that really also brought me to this franchise, and I'm very sour towards the Chicago franchise about a lot of things that they've done lately, and from the top down with Stan Bowman and John McDonough, and the way they've acted and kind of treated the fans like they're idiots sometimes. And it really offended me as a huge hockey fan and a long-time Blackhawks fan. And just after a while, I just got tired of it. And they're kind of stuck in the old school. It's the old boys, kind of the old boys network still. And what I liked about Seattle is they're being very progressive. They're hiring women in prominent positions, and they're ever fits you. Like, that's awesome. I love that. It's like, you're being progressive. You're trying to move everyone forward, this sport forward, and make it equal for everybody. And I love that about this organization. I can't be happier that now I'm going to be covering a team that is like this, is very progressive in a sport that resists being progressive oftentimes. What were your thoughts on this, Ryan? I mean, I'm sure you have lots of them on it.
Not necessarily any thoughts, but just I think back to this time a year ago when we ran a story about what makes the Kraken so adamant about wanting to have diversity and inclusion be such an integral part of their franchise. Because as of this time a year ago, 54% of their executive vice presidents were women and 25% were people of color. And what it comes back to is something that everybody kept saying, which is, in order to really show this community that, hey, we're a part of it, it has to be reflective of what Seattle looks like. And when you come here, I mean, yes, there are conversations about, is Seattle diverse enough? Because, like, while you do have Black people, you have people who come from different parts of Asian backgrounds, whether that be Chinese, Japanese, Korean, Pakistani, Indian. There are some who say, is there enough of a Hispanic population here, an indigenous population, people who are of Polynesian culture as well? And so that's something that's very much part of the lexicon of this city. That exists with other concepts too, when it comes to things like socioeconomics, gender identity, LGBTQIA. Like, these are very prominent subjects in this city. And for the Kraken, and able-bodyism as well. And for the Kraken, it was something that for them, they looked at it as, like, not only is it reflective of the city, but to have that sort of diversity, it allows you to think about things in a different context. So when you're pushing things out there to fans, it's completely unlike anything that they may be used to seeing, like from an NHL team, but it's something you see in daily life where you wish you did. And I think an example of that, a recent example is when John Forsland and Everett Fitzhugh did something on the Kraken's website recently. And there was an ASL interpreter right there. And, like, how often do you really see that? Or do you really see someone doing live captioning for those sort of events? And so for them, like, these are things that they just view as, like, hey, this is what we should be doing to have everyone feel included. But it just happens to be that, A, it strikes a chord here in Seattle because it's reflective of Seattle, but B, it's reflective of really a lot of places throughout not only just North America, but the world. And that's how people, I think, in some ways come to resonate with the Kraken at this stage.
Yeah, I agree. I completely agree with that. I think it's, if you're going to start a company, it's not even a hockey team. You're just going to start a company at this time. You want it to be all inclusive. And that's how they're treating this. It's like they're starting a company, not they're starting a hockey team. They're starting a company. And then, it's part of the culture. So, yeah.
And being aware of the times. Like, I think being aware of where the world is going and how they're hiring diverse candidates, and even playing in an arena that says Climate Pledge Arena. Like, climate change is important to the entire world, but especially the sport of hockey. Think about that. Like, the polar ice caps melting, like, people aren't going to be able to play outside of regular rinks and stuff like that. So that's a big issue facing not only hockey, but the world at large.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, it is. And it just, like, I'm trying to think of the best way to say it. It's one of those things where I think a lot of people have these discussions about how often do you want sort of these everyday real life issues to intersect into sports, because it's the idea that sports provides people an escape much in the same ways movies and music do. But at the same time, when you look at the movies and the music in the form of art that have inspired people, it's because of what goes on in everyday real life and society. And so when you're the Kraken and you're looking at all these different things, I mean, you're mindful of it, but when you look at their diversity push as well, you know, I think this is one of the things that makes it sort of interesting. We've seen post George Floyd companies across every industry talk about wanting to get more diversity. Whereas if with the Kraken, it was a priority for them well before George Floyd even happened. And so it's raised some really interesting questions about, well, if the Kraken can do this, why can't other teams? And is it one of those things where the Kraken was starting new and other teams have been in existence, therefore it makes it a little bit harder because you have people in place? Is it, do you change that narrative by saying, okay, when we do interviews, let's try to get more diverse candidates? I mean, it's a problem that has a variety of ways that it can be answered. But at the same time, like, it's something that when you look at what the Kraken have done, like, they've made that a staple for what they've wanted to do. And from it, I think it's sort of come this expectation of, well, if they can do it, you know, what is stopping other teams, not just the NHL, but really around all these different leagues and sports from trying to do something very similar.
And we saw that in Chicago with them hiring, a female in a very high position in the front office after John McDonough left.
Jamie Faulkner.
Yeah, exactly. And, that's great. That's how it should be. The most qualified candidate should be it. It doesn't matter what color, creed, race, gender, anything like that. It shouldn't matter. Just as long as you're the most qualified person for the position. That's how it should be.
And all sports are trending that way. The Florida Marlins hired the first female general manager in the history of professional sports. Like, it's trending in that direction. And it's refreshing to see an organization like they're starting from the ground. Like, they're not going to know any different. It's not going to be any old boys. It's just that's how it's going to be for the Kraken going forward.
Yeah.
So
well, to your point about if I can jump in real quick,
go ahead.
Kim Ng. I mean, we talk about her and it's like, yes, she's the first female general manager among the 4 major league sports, as well as the first female general manager of color. But like, when we talk about women in these positions, like, so often is a league like the WNBA often forgotten in these discussions, or the NWSL. And that's just it. It's like, it seems like for so long, the divider between men's sports and women's sports was, and people might disagree with this term, but in some ways it kind of was a separate but equal sort of thing, where it's like, yes, women can be executives, but in these spaces, whereas if now you're seeing that dynamic change, yes, are there conversations about could that change happen quicker? Totally. I mean, people are wanting to see, well, Becky Hammon, when there's an when there's an NBA coaching hire, like, will Becky Hammon get a legitimate shot? Because I mean, she has learned from one of the best on a staff where like they've forgotten more about basketball than most people will ever even dream of thinking. It's one of those things where when you look at how sports is changing, the argument can be had about should this have happened much, much sooner. But the thing is when you look at it, it's about where it's going and where it's heading. And that becomes, I think, something of a larger conversation about how do we view things in society. And so when it comes to just whether it's the Kraken, whether it's leagues like the WNBA, NWSL, whatever, the reality of it is this. You can't say that these sports and these leagues and these teams are designed to attract as many people as possible. But when it comes to people running these organizations, it's only one group of people who are allowed to sit there at the table. By opening it up and having different people, you might be able to expose yourself to something you didn't know was there, and you might be able to tap into something. So one of the conversations I had when the NHL was about to release its We Skate For program was with Javier Gutierrez, who is the team president, CEO of the Arizona Coyotes. And one of the points he made to me was, he's like, people, the minute Alex Morello, who's the owner, took over, they said to Alex and Javier, they were like, hey, now that you're there as 2 Hispanics and Latinos, I'm sure you're going to be tapping into this market of Spanish-speaking people in Phoenix. And he's like, okay, but were you asking these same questions in Dallas, Los Angeles, Chicago, New York, Boston, South Florida, Tampa? Like, there are plenty of Spanish-speaking people in those markets. And so well, yes, you have Latino ownership in the city like Phoenix, and it's something that they're thinking about. It raises that question of, you could have been doing this in other markets where there were no Latino ownership as well.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point. It is. So we hit the kind of the heavy stuff. Let's get the real heavy stuff in. What do you think of the logo, Ryan?
Don't have an opinion on it. I mean, I'm the worst person to talk to about these things because I'm the journalist that's I don't have an opinion on anything because it's fair to always remain objective.
Mm-hmm.
Now that said, just from talking to people, it seems like the logo is a universal success in a lot of ways, and it's something that being here in the short time we've been here and in the limited sessions I've been outside of our house, you do see people wearing this logo. You do see it on hats and hoodies and t-shirts, the whole nine. And it's strange. I've said this on a couple of podcasts. We've already seen more people wearing Kraken apparel living in Seattle in 2 months than the 2+ years we lived in Denver with Avalanche fans wearing Avs apparel, or just people in Denver wearing Avs apparel. And I mean, yes, there are some differences in that. The Kraken are new, but at the same time, the Avalanche are a cup contender that has one of the 2 best players on the planet, Nathan McKinnon. And so, yes, it goes back to a conversation about branding, which is another discussion for another day. But when you look at what the Kraken have done with that logo, I mean, they've made it their own, whether it's the tentacle, whether it's the red eye, the way the S is shaped, the color that still gives that nautical feel, which is really present throughout all the teams here in this city. And even when you look at the alternate logo where the Space Needle is on top of the anchor, as Sean has on his hat, it's something that just resonates in a lot of different ways. And, that was always going to be their challenge with the logo and the name, is when you look at this city and its sports teams, Mariners, Seahawks, Storm, Sounders, Reign, even extend it to the colleges like Huskies, and even though Washington State's on the other side of the state, Cougars, it's there's all a regional theme. And not only is there a regional theme, but for most of them, it's you think water. So if you're the Kraken, or at that time NHL Seattle, you can't come up with something hi, we're the Seattle Sandstormers. That's not going to work. So for them to find something that hit that nautical theme and have a color scheme that just fits within the city and the region's landscape, it was difficult because I'll say this and stop talking, but sometimes I think one of the things people forget is everyone in Seattle, when you look at the colors, it's well, why not go with blue, white, and green? Well, it's well, the Canucks wear blue, white, and green. And so you kind of have to avoid that pitfall as well. So it was a lot they had to juggle in order to find something that they felt was going to work.
Yeah, I love it. I like the colors. I really like the nautical feel. I was hoping they were going to stick to some kind of nautical feel, but the thing I was I love to see it, the name, the Seattle Thunderbirds. I love the name. I just think it flows so nice. The colors and everything. I think I really like everything about that. So I was kind of hoping they would go Seattle Firebirds or something like that, because I like how that sounds. But Kraken is no, that it fits right in. I have no problem with it. I love it. I like that the whole symbolism of the mythical monster and all that stuff. And I actually, you didn't hear it because I didn't play the intro music, but I'm gonna throw it in afterwards. But I picked a metal band, their pirate metal band, as the intro, called Ailstorm, which kind of gives when you listen to their music, it kind of gives you a nautical feel to it. So
a pirate metal band.
Yeah, it you know what? And funny story. I went to. No.
I got a question. So, is there a speed drummer, a dude with a peg leg, and it sounds offbeat?
Almost.
Because what I'm just picturing is someone speed drumming like this, and it's I will take you to the terrors of the depth at Long John Silver. I could be totally wrong here, but pirate metal, heavy metal just sounds like it's a fascinating concept.
It's not pirate death metal, so it's more of a happier metal. They joke around with it. They're very playful with it.
Okay.
And it's definitely a big joke, drinking mead and the whole thing, that, and drinking rum, and they joke, it's very, tongue in cheek and fun and light. But I actually went to Tampa, Florida a couple years back. A friend of mine, his son played in a real death metal band. but they were going to be playing 2 weeks or 2 blocks away from where I was staying for work. So I walked over and I was going to go hang out with them because I hadn't seen these people in a while. And Ailstorm, the band that's in the intro, opened up for them. And I had no idea who they were. I had never heard of them before. And I walked in there and I was listening to their music and I'm like, these guys are fun. This is fun. This is fun stuff. I love the thing they're putting on here. They have a guitar and they have like all kinds of weird instruments and stuff that they add into the mix. So I've been a big fan. I got my son into it when, he was old enough. And so I'm like, I wanted to incorporate them because of the nautical feel and the pirates and the whole part of it. But I wanted to keep it kind of on the metal because that's my personality. So I wanted to keep it kind of on the metal side. So that's why the song is what it is. And actually the outro too is Ailstorm as well. They're from somewhere like Sweden or something.
Yeah,
like
I was going to say Norway or something.
Yeah.
I think a friend of mine who's really big into death metal, and I've listened to Iced Earth like a million times.
That guy's in jail right now, by the way.
What? Oh yeah, I know that they're breaking up, and then
he was part of the insurrection stuff at the Capitol.
That's right.
Yeah,
and that's why Demons and Wizards is splitting up too.
Yeah.
They're combination of Blind Guardian.
I'm getting way off. Ryan's laughing on the other end. I'm getting way off the beat.
But I really like the logo and stuff like the nautical field. I was kind of hoping for the Seattle Pilots name is what I was hoping for.
I would have been cool with any of them.
Just because like they had a hockey team named the Seattle Pilots in 1915 and 1924, and also kind of tied in with the baseball team, stuff like that. But I don't know how the colors would work. Yeah. I love the colors of this right now. That's my big thing. I love the teal and the blue, and it's just it just radiate. I don't know. It radiate, like as soon as I saw it, I was like, I have to have that. Mm-hmm. I have to have that. So that, and I think logo branding especially is important for a new sport. Like you have to have that logo and that brand recognition, because otherwise, I mean, how many people wear Chicago White Sox hats that have probably never even been to the South Side or seen the White Sox play? Or how many people wear Blackhawk stuff and have never been there? So I think the Kraken logo is perfect for what they're trying to go for.
Hearing you talk about the White Sox, it goes back to a conversation about branding. And you think about Frank Thomas, Little Hurt, like some of those teams back in the day.
Yeah.
The best branding the White Sox had in the 90s was Dr. Dre wearing a Sox hat.
Yes.
Right.
That's the reality of it. And so like when it comes to like branding now versus branding back then, it's so different. And one of the conversations that I had, and it was for a story about their mascot, was with Lamont Buford and Johnny Greco, was about just kind of the way this has changed over time. Because it's not to say that thought wasn't put into these logos, but like you look at like logos that are over 100 years old, whether they be the Red Sox, the Yankees, like they were very straightforward and simple. Whereas if like over time, like we think about the Milwaukee Brewers logo, where it's like, there's a lot of moving parts to like that old school logo with the glove. That's an M and a B and the baseball. And when you look at the Kraken logo, like there's some moving parts to that as well. And that's just it goes back to something like I learned from a high school football coach of all things when I was in South Florida. And so what he explained was when you look at audiences today, and he's like, and I've had to do this with kids on the football team, you have to make people feel like empowered in a way to where this is theirs. So he's like, whenever we choose new uniforms and logos, we let our players vote on it, because it's like playing football is not enough. Like it has to be, what's that sort of interactive feel? And like with the Kraken logo, like there's all the things we mentioned about, like you have to hit up with this nautical theme, the theme of the city, but also it's just like, this is a city and an environment where you've got creative minds who work at Amazon, Microsoft, Zulily, you name it. I mean, Nintendo of America is based in Redmond, T-Mobile, like Weyerhaeusen. Like there's a lot of Fortune 500 and successful companies that are here with creative people. And so when you look at that, it's like, yes, the S by itself, like it gets the point across. You have the tentacle and the story behind that, this like evil red eye where it's like, you wouldn't think red would fit with that color scheme, but it does fit with that color scheme. And the shape of it makes it feel like it's its own sort of like mythical being that's on the attack. And so like, that's just it. It's like, when you look at branding and what these teams are facing, like it's a lot of things they've got to consider.
Yeah, I love that secondary logo, the anchor with the the Space Needle on it. I really like that logo as well. You get if you look at the avatar on Twitter for the Kraken Hostel, you could see that I used that logo in the background, and I added a chaluto in the on top of it just to make it ours a little bit. But yeah, I really like that logo too. They did a good job on that one. They could have almost went with that as a primary and not not missed a beat. So. Well, we have some questions. I want to get the questions in because new listeners, new followers. I want to make sure we address that. But and then I'm going to end on something that's a little more relevant with what hockey that's going on now, NHL wide, and I'm just teasing that a little bit. But and then we'll end on that. So the first guy, Sergeant Pickles, he's actually sent in questions a couple times before. So thanks, Sergeant Pickles, for listening. He said, "Hey guys, should the Kraken try to acquire 2022 entry level or entry draft picks rather than 2021 due to the lack of scouting available next season?" And then on top of that, he added he's extra curious to see if the WHL, hopefully starting back up, if that sways things back in the in the 2021 realm of things. Go ahead, start.
Sure.
Ryan.
So it's an interesting philosophy to kind of look at 2022 as opposed to 2021. The thing is, yes, it's pertinent for the Kraken because if you're another team, it's not that anyone can afford to have a draft class where there's incomplete information, but you've already got years of draft classes to build from. Whereas if with the Kraken, this is where the ground floor lies. The problem is how many other teams are going to be thinking the same thing, that maybe let's try to hedge our bets for 2022 because 2021 with limited viewings, limited games, limited everything, maybe it's a bit harder of a challenge to pull off. Now, as far as just kind of the second part of that question, because the second part of that question stemmed around the WHL, the league is set to start later, as in March, from what I remember seeing. But the challenge that the league and its prospects are going to face, and let's take someone like Connor Roulette as a really good example. Connor Roulette was someone that he's put up some strong numbers. But as everyone from the Kraken to every evaluator says, the gap a player can make between ages 16 and 17, or i.e. the year before their draft to their draft year, can be monumental, whether it's just the natural physical changes that come with things like height, whether it's the things that you've worked on like speed and strength. How is that going to look? And now you're only seeing this player for, let's say, 20 to 24 games. Yes, you're getting views of this player, but like, is 24 games a long enough sample size? And when you think about the typical junior season, which let's say it's 60 to 64 games, depending on, again, if you're the CHL, USHL, NAHL, whatever the case might be, like those games from the beginning of the season to the ones in the middle of the year to the postseason ones, they all bring value because it lets you know so much. So it's going to be one of those things where, like, for every team, it's going to be a challenge, but for the Kraken especially, because, again, not saying that people can't miss out on draft classes. No team's going to have a perfect one. But if you're the Kraken, the difference is this is your foundation. Like, you can try to draft prospects in the expansion draft. You can maybe try to take flyers on people who are made available once their ELCs are over. But it's a lot to consider.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Sean?
I think projection software and your projection evaluation tool is going to be is immensely important this year, because like Ryan said, you have to, even in the 24 games, are you going to be able to project what the player is going to be? And whether it's this year or next year, I think Ron Francis and Norm McIver and all the rest of his staff.
Norm McIver, oh boy. Go ahead.
They've got to project out like what in the regular NHL draft, what their prospects are going to be in the future. And I think the WHL season, maybe they'll get to see them more because they're closer to that location. So they might be able to safely travel. But I think projection software, projection models, and all that stuff is going to be the most important thing going forward for the regular draft.
Yeah. And Ryan, the reason I rolled my eyes at Norm MacIver is we're very familiar with him in Chicago.
No,
and,
I know.
His reputation in Chicago was not all that great. It was kind of assumed that he was kind of John McDonough's little reporter, and reported back to McDonough everything that was going on. So,
but then Laz and Powers put out a story saying that he disagreed with Stan Bowman, and that's why he wasn't getting promoted, and that's why he took the lateral move to join the Kraken.
It could be
he
now.
disagreed because he didn't buy into the group think. So.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Plus, he was probably in line for something. He'd been kind of in the same position for a long time, and if you're not moving up, then where are you going?
Right.
A lot of people don't want to sit around at the same position for years and years and years. But back to the question really quickly. I know this is a funny comparison, but Sean and I were talking this before we started recording, and it gives you a lot of perspective. It's only a game, NHL 21. It's only a game, but it gives you a lot of perspective when you're going in there and you're kind of looking at some of this back office stuff. And I had to actually create a team from nothing, an expansion team, and go through exactly what Ron Francis is going to have to do. Picking team, players being available, picking a certain amount of them, staying under the salary cap, all that stuff. But when it was all said and done, and I had done the expansion draft, and I'd sat there and I spent more time than I should spend on a video game doing an expansion draft. But I thought it out. I tried to take it really seriously. I wanted to put myself in those shoes. I had a team. I had an NHL team. I didn't have a whole lot of play. I mean, I went through the draft as well, and you have 7 rounds in the draft. That's 7 more players. Like, how do you fill out an AHL team? How do you how do you fill out an ECHL team with only 7 draft picks and, the players, the 30 players you pick from, the other teams in the league, or 31 players that you pick from the other teams in the league. It's 30 because
it's 30. They don't get a pick from Vegas.
Yeah, right. So I had a decent set of players, but then what else do you have to make up that AHL team? So I had to go out there. I had to go sign a bunch of free agents that, you had seen discarded from other teams or whatever, names that have floated around the league forever. So it made it very interesting. And it made me kind of think about this question that, should they try to acquire draft picks further down the road? You need to fill up your system. You need to get players in your system, and you need to start getting them developed and coming up through the system. And you can't push it off. I mean, sometimes they say, if you missed on a first round draft pick, it could set you could set your franchise back like 3 to 5 years or something like that. But this is kind of the same thing. You're setting your franchise, the players that are developing in your system, young players, you're setting them back. If you were to, move picks, not make as many picks this year as you possibly can to get that system moving and rolling. So I don't think that, if it were me, I don't think I'd be acquiring as many draft picks as I could, try to get some solid players. I would not be deferring anything to like next year. You can worry about next year. There's going to be things, or 2 years, I should say. There's going to be things like what happened with Vegas, where Vegas had a ton of defensemen that people could have traded for. And some probably should have traded for. Quality defensemen, middle pair defensemen, whatever. Some teams need them. And, you have that asset that you can, if you pick enough of them, or however they're going to set up this draft, you have that asset that you can then weaponize and use for draft picks further down the road. So that's kind of my whole thoughts on that part of it.
Well, it's interesting because I think when you bring up Vegas and you talk about drafting and developing, I mean, how they've gone about that has been really interesting because, of course, like they used the pick, well, not pick, but they used the player that is Eric Brandstrom to go get Mark Stone. But then on the flip side, like it's about trying to find guys that yes, for all these high-end big ticket items that you're going to get, like getting Pietrangelo in free agency, signing Robin Leonard to a big deal, on top of, again, coming up with deals for all these guys who are already there when it comes to like Marcia So, Pacioretty, Alex Tuck and the like. It helps to have guys you can get on ELCs. And so like when you look at guys like Zach Whitecloud and Nicholas Hague, like they're examples of players that like you've been able to plug right away that I think right now are 21 and 23 in terms of ages. And like, that's going to be one of the obstacles like the Kraken face. So like, to your point about like, yes, your future is right away. Well, your future is something that you have to deal with, but maybe you can deal with it down the road. Like, that's where it gets a little bit of a philosophical discussion, because the conversation has been, what are they going to be? Like, are they going to be the traditional route where it's like, let's take your lumps the first few years, and then by year 4 through 6, hypothetically, this is when you hit your stride? Or do you look at it as like, no, Vegas showed you can win right away. Maybe you don't fall it to the T where by year 3 and 4, you're already in cap hell, but you're able to be competitive, especially when, let's face it, it's been the uncomfortable part people don't want to say out loud about this team right now, which is the flat cap and COVID is something that is really going to alter what teams are doing for the expansion draft. We've already seen it go down in Tampa with Tyler Johnson and putting him on waivers. There's going to be other teams who are going to go through a very similar situation. So you're going to have options if you're the Kraken. It's just a matter of how do you navigate that landscape to where you can be competitive and it's your own unique thing. But in terms of how to get there, that's probably one of those discussions that keeps people up late at night, unless they already have the answer and they're just not telling anyone.
Yeah, for sure. Well, it's good that you bring it up that way, because that leads kind of right into our next question from Metal Mike SF66. So he's a metalhead, so he's already got my attention. Thanks, Mike, for sending your questions in. But do you think it's more important to build a strong defensive core, including goalies, or 4 strong forward lines for the upcoming draft? I guess this is just what is our opinion on this. What do you think, Ryan?
Defensemen are one of those commodities that you can never have too much of them, and from it you can go trade for parts. So let's look at what Vegas has done. Yes, we talk about the scoring, of course, but when you look at what they've done defensively, whether it's been through the draft, free agency, or the expansion draft, they've been able to set up a core of 6 that when you look at their core and they are healthy, it is an indomitable core that has speed, it has strength, it has size, it can move the puck, it can do all these different things. And it's the same thing with the St. Louis Blues, with Pietrangelo there and now with Torrey Krug. Like, you're looking at someone like Colton Parayko. You are not moving Colton Parayko. He moves you. And that's where it's like, when you look at the Blues, and what everybody said is when they finally got the goaltending, it's what made them so tough to play against. Yes, the forwards were there too, but defense it's important. And we're seeing that now in Colorado, where the backbone of that future is Cale Makar, Sam Girard, Connor Timmins, and Bowen Byram, and they've got more kids coming through the system on top of what's there with McKinnon, Ranson, and Landeskog. And so that's what's really interesting is, like, when you look at like Ron Francis's time in Carolina, granted it was limited, like, he was able to draft in a way to where they were able to get players that fit both of those molds. So maybe they go for a balanced approach, but if you had to pick one, probably defense, because if you can get one good defenseman, as we saw with Vegas with Brandstrom, that's what allowed them to get Mark Stone.
And Vegas got Shea Theodore in that draft too, just leveraging their position against Anaheim.
Like, and
if you're the Ducks, you'd probably love to have Shea Theodore right now.
Yeah. I mean, right now, I was just telling Sean, I'm like, Shea Theodore has been Norris Trophy worthy for several parts of his, Vegas career. So he's right up there with a lot of the top defensemen in the league. Myself, something that was under the radar with Vegas was they got Marc-Andre Fleury. They had a goalie that they knew they could depend on, and ended up being a media darling on top of this. That they had to leverage the problem that Pittsburgh had, which was having 2 goalies, go with the young one or stay with the old one. But they got a solid goaltender who's going to make saves, and that's going to be very important to an NHL team. And we're seeing that in Chicago, prime here. Like, they didn't know who was going to be making saves here in Chicago, because they had 3 goalies that had very little NHL experience, and the ones that did have NHL experience weren't exactly that successful. So, and then Kevin Lankinen with his 930 something, save percentage. All of a sudden, you got a guy back there who's making saves, and it makes everything, it settles everything down. And Corey Crawford was that guy for a while too, when he wasn't injured. So, if they can poach a goalie from someone, a good young goalie, or even a good old goalie, who cares at this point? If you can get a goalie, they can stop the puck for you for 2 or 3 years until you can draft some goalies or free agents or whatever. Like that's a place you got to focus too. I'm a big proponent, because I'm a goaltender myself, of the defense and the goalie. Like your forwards I think they'll they'll work themselves out, like William Karlsson did. Like no one knew that William Karlsson was going to turn into what he turned in. They knew he was a talented player, but he wasn't really putting things together where he was at. And when, he got a chance where he got a little bit of leeway, and, he turned into a really good player for them. So, the same thing, like Alex Tuck was just an AHL guy when they drafted him. He was, coming up for Minnesota, but he was just kind of an AHL guy. And he turned out to be a wonderful find as well. So you're going to get some of these on the forward. It's a lot harder to find those diamonds in the rough on the defense. Like defense, they seem to kind of know what you are early on and what you're going to be. It takes a little while to develop them, but
Right.
If you got the size and you can move your feet, and if the bbasic skills are there and they can teach them the rest, then sure, yeah. But yes, if you're a terrible defenseman at 22 or 22, 21 years old, like you're not going to be around very long. So, that's how I feel about it. Sean, what do you think?
Yeah, I think I'm going to go with the defenseman argument as well, because like you just said, Gate, that defensemen take longer to develop. So if you have that's going to take you longer to get there. Forwards, they'll come and go. Center is a very important position. I think what was overlooked with this, what Ryan made the argument about St. Louis's defense. Their centers were also really, really good on that team. They had 4 centers that could win faceoffs and that were big, just strong guys.
And Ryan O'Reilly's a stud. So
yeah. So I think you need a strong core, and then you need a strong defensive core, but you also need centers. I think centers is a big thing that I think Seattle should look into. If they can get one quality number, like a quality center to kind of build around, I think that's the way to go.
Metal Mike has a second question. I'm gonna start off with it. Will the first head coach be someone that has never coached in the NHL before? I think probably it's going to be a coach that has some experience. Only because I feel that the guy who I really like is Rickard Granberg from the Swedish national coach. I think he's a real, I think he could be that next guy that comes over from Europe and does really well. Plus he's got a great beard too. But that's who I kind of wanted to see, but I kind of feel like they're going to want someone with a little bit of experience and keep some consistency in the, in the locker room. His experience, the NHL grind before, maybe not for a long time, but at least a little while. So that's kind of what I think they're going to do. Cause I think if, you go with Granberg or whatever, and things don't go well, the first thing they're going to do is they're going to point to well, you got this inexperienced coach from Europe and da. And that's the whole storyline goes that way. What do you think, Ryan?
What makes it interesting about them going outside of the NHL, or maybe getting a coach that doesn't have NHL experience, is when you look back at what the Nashville Predators did with Barry Trotz. And, they hired a coach who didn't have NHL experience. He had plenty of AHL experience. And it turned into someone who not only was, frankly, the face of their franchise for more than a decade, but you talk about someone who's going to be a Hall of Fame coach, that everywhere he's been, he's had success. And so it's interesting because Granberg is the name that does come up when you think about coaches who are outside the NHL. His record speaks for itself, whether it's with the Swedish national team or what he's doing in Switzerland at the moment. So it's fascinating. But then when you look around at the NHL for assistant coaches, speaking of Trotz, Lane Lambert, who is who's Trotz's associate coach with the New York Islanders, like it's a name that's a very interesting one just because of what he's learned. He's been a part of a Stanley Cup winning staff, but also he's someone who gets the idea of consistency. So it's fair to say maybe it's possible, just because with Seattle, they've already done things in a way that's been unique. I mean, maybe they go with someone with NHL experience, maybe they don't. But when you look at the options that are out there, whether it's Granberg, Lane Lambert, maybe it's a coach that's currently under contract, maybe it's someone who's out of contract like a Gerard Gallant, like there is a reasoning behind why it makes sense.
Yeah. If they go with Mike Babcock, I'll just jump out the way. I'll jump off the Space Needle because I don't want that. I think he's highly overrated. I don't think they don't need that kind of circus. Like, I think they could do so much better than that. Ryan, Sean.
Yeah, I would like Kronberg thing. The only skepticism I have is I'd be worried if he turned into Mike Johnston from the Penguins back in the day, where they hired the college coach and then they had to can him after like 25 games and went to Sully,
or Elpo Suhonen for Chicago. I mean, they hired him. He was the big head coach over in Europe, and then he just never materialized, and he's never been back since.
Yeah, I think Francis is probably going to go with like a Gallant or a Bruce Boudreau, just somebody who's a solid NHL coach that'll get the franchise going in the right direction. I would actually like to see if they tried Todd Nelson, the who was the coach of the Grand Rapids Griffins a couple of years ago. I mean, yeah, he was an NHL head coach and he was bad with the Oilers like 6 or 7 years ago, but
he was interviewed for the Dutch job though, and he's someone whose name definitely does get talked about in the sense of, hey, when there's an opening, should an opening come up, whether it's Seattle or elsewhere, is he a possibility?
Yeah.
I'd like to see Groundberg because I want to see him in the NHL, and what better to have him in the NHL with the team that I'm going to be covering. So yeah, that's my pick, but we'll see. Last question, and then we'll end on something else, which I think is a real interesting subject to end on. From Puck Place Joe. So obviously with the Seattle reference there, which Avs, now this is going to be interesting because you got very much the expertise on the Avs side. Which Avs, the ones that could possibly be exposed, would you most likely see playing here? I'm meaning probably Seattle in Seattle. What do you think, Ryan?
Ryan Graves or Pavel Francouz are two interesting candidates because with Ryan Graves, with the format they go, depending on what happens with Eric Johnson's no movement clause, you're protecting Cale Makar and Samuel Girard, and you're going to try to protect Devon Toews because you found a first pairing partner with Makar, and plus you just signed him to a deal that is a bit more expensive and it's a year longer compared to what you gave Ryan Graves. So he's a candidate, but also Pavel Francouz, because right now the thought is maybe Grubauer is the goaltender they protect, but if they protect Grubauer and leave Francouz exposed, and Francouz has another year similar to what he did last season, you're talking about someone who can get wins in a short period, can be consistent, and you're talking about doing it at an AAV of $2 million a year. So it would probably be those two.
Yeah, interesting. Sean, you got any thoughts on that?
I'll defer to you guys on that one. I'm not well versed enough in the Avs.
I'll just say in my video game expansion draft, the Avs left Toews exposed, and I picked him. So that's who I took, Devon Toews.
I'm going to defer to you gentlemen on that one.
Well, all right. So wrapping up, the way we're going to end this, the current situation in the NHL, the COVID situation, what's going on. We just, we saw the bubble thing happen. Everything went well. Now they started this season a little bit strange with the divisions and the less games and stuff like that. But they're kind of going on the fly with this whole thing, and things are starting to head off the rails a little bit. More and more teams are having these outbreaks where a majority of the roster can't play. Teams are, games are being postponed or canceled. How far are they going to be able to push this out? Because, you don't want the Stanley Cup being, given out in, the end of July or August or something like that.
You got to push the expansion draft. You got to push everything. You push your whole
right.
off season.
Yeah, they wanted to have a semi-normal, or at least close to a semi-normal off season, so that teams like Seattle now, who's building a team from the ground up, starting with the expansion draft, is going to have the time to work and get their stuff done like a normal team would. So, I mean, what are your thoughts, Ryan, on what's going on right now with this whole COVID thing and how things, in New Jersey, and Buffalo having problems, and
Minnesota,
all these teams having such problems with COVID. What do you think, Ryan?
Well, I mean, it's interesting because when you look at the COVID protocols, the initial documents, it was something that it appeared like maybe the NHL had a lot of bases covered. And then, of course, the season goes along. And now there's conversations about getting HEPA filters on benches and doing other things to make sure that it works and there's efficiency. So there was the story that Michael Russo did where he talked to an NBA team doctor about kind of what that league has been doing when comparing it to the Wild situation. And that's kind of been the interesting part is when you look at the NHL versus that of the NBA is a league where you're seeing the Sixers play the Lakers and you're seeing teams fly to several places and they're not being really limited. Whereas if in the NHL, I mean, again, it's by your division for the most part. And from that comes conversations about like maybe what's the differences between those two leagues. Granted, there are times when people don't want to compare them, but the reality is there's a lot of similarities because of the scheduling, the buildings, the amount of games, the travel, you name it. In terms of just the NHL and what it's currently trying to figure out and situate, it's essentially how do you get a season going and how do you keep it going and how do you get games going while getting everyone to be safe. And when you look back at one of the points made in the story that Michael Russo had, like some of it went back to, okay, what are some of the players doing? So from what I remember, it talked about how like with the NBA players, I believe it was, those guys kind of keep to themselves. And I can remember if they said there was something about, hey, are those around them also tested? And is this something the NHL would look at? But it's probably taking a deeper look at how do you get in this situation and saying, okay, what's a good way to resolve it?
Yeah. And like something one of our writers brought up, Juliana Nakac, who also works with the NWHL. So she's seen, a lot of things that have gone on with that, which did not end well as well. But, the whole thing with yesterday, I think it was in Vegas, where someone in the second period, they got a positive COVID test back in the middle of the second period. Well, that kind of defeats the purpose. If you're not going to get the results back before game time, you're kind of defeating the purpose on the whole thing. So, and
the Toronto Maple Leafs now put in a testing, like a rapid test that you have to take every time before you go into the building, which I think should be league wide. I think that's what they should. I think the league needs to do more testing. I believe they test players every 3 days. I thought it was, at least last time I'd really researched it. I think that's something they should do. And also, I mean, back to when the pandemic first started, the NBA was out front. I think the NBA was, they discovered the first cases. And as soon as they knew when the threat was looming, they were already thinking about what's our contingency plans? What do we do? So I think the NBA has been more progressively thinking about COVID in terms of like before they even did the bubbles. And then as this season started, I think the NBA is kind of like a template that other leagues should try to follow. They've been more progressive about it, and at least in my opinion. And I read I can't remember who wrote it for The Athletic about just how it all, like when the first case came out and last year, and just how the NBA went about their process. So I just have more faith in what the NBA is doing.
And the funny part about it too is like the NHL, I think they got a little arrogant about it because it worked so well. Their bubble worked so well. There was really no issues. And that was great. And at the time, I think if you remember, I could be wrong, but I thought with the NBA, they had a couple of cases early, which got scary. Like you thought, we were like, oh, the NHL's working this out and they're doing it all in their bubble, but the NBA in their bubble, I don't know what's going to happen here. But as it turned out, like the NBA like snuffed it out early. They got it, they figured it out and smoothed everything out. And the NHL, like they went through their whole thing. They did well, but it's almost like it feels to me like they were a little arrogant about it coming into this. Like we got it, we know it, we did this whole thing, which wouldn't be beyond the NHL to do something like that. But so that was, I mean, that was kind of my whole opinion on that. Ryan,
in the NBA bubbles, they had layers to their bubble. Like from what I read, like you took one test and then you were in the outer bubble, and then after you like quarantined and passed your daily test for so many days, then you moved into the inner bubble. And then there was like where it was completely free after that. So you had to go through like 3 levels to get into their bubble. So the NBA was just, I think they caught those tests like in the outer bubble. So they didn't even, I think you were just like isolated to your hotel rooms and could only walk to your testing site and back is what I thought I read. I think Yahoo did the piece on that, but.
That point about the NBA, was interesting because for the story that we did about protocols, where it was just kind of here are all the things that are going on. One of the points that got made was when you look at teams that share buildings. So let's just use the United Center as for an example. Like with the NBA, for them, their whole thing is like if it was up to them, they wouldn't have anyone but NBA personnel in those buildings. And it's just obviously that's not going to happen. But when you think about like the stringent nature the NBA has taken, it's not to say that the NHL hasn't taken a stringent nature, because one of the examples that came up in this story, oddly enough, was the Carolina Hurricanes. And this was before they went through their round of COVID. But one of the points that got made was like, let's say you're in a dressing room or a team environment and someone has their mask down because, they're eating or they're taking a drink. If their mask is down, someone in the dressing room or that space yells mask. So that way they can make the person whose mask is down aware that their mask needs to be on without actually calling out that person. And so it's one of those things where like things are being done, and we've all heard the stories of people saying, I've done X, I've done Y, I've done Z, I've still caught it. So with all of this, if you're the NHL, I mean, yes, they are certainly making changes, but maybe this is the time to go back and hit the reset button to say, okay, where can things be different? Where can things be better? Because like when we talk about the NBA and the NHL, and this might seem really, really minor, but it's interesting. Let's even think about spacing, which oddly enough, it's weird to talk about spacing and not the actual concept of spacing. But when you look at an NBA game and you look at the way an NBA bench is set up, all these seats are staggered when players are done playing. It's like they have their own space. It seems like they're good 3 to 6 feet away from everybody else. So you're able to do that. With the NHL, everyone is still hunched together. And so unless you're going to build a larger, bigger bench, I mean, that's maybe one example of how when we have these conversations about the two leagues, what makes it so different is like if you're the NBA, you actually have the physical space to separate people so that way they can keep away from one another and you have your own individual area. Whereas with the NHL, it's bunched together. And even if you keep guys in separate hotel rooms and all this and that, with all the conversations that have been held about like, hey, is this something you can pick up through on-ice interactions? Like, yeah, you've got 22, 23 people sitting together on a bench between players, coaching staff, equipment managers, medical personnel. So it's one of those things where like, it may not be an example people might think of, but when you look and compare the two, it stands out.
Yeah,
and the most obvious thing too is NHL teams are much bigger than NBA teams numbers wise. The amount of players that are that are traveling, that are in the arena, that are on the benches, like there's double the amount of people there. So with double the amount of people, that's double the amount of possible exposure. So it's not going to be as easy. I think should be, the NBA has room, they could spread those seats out, like you said, and there's no fans, so it doesn't matter. Spread them out all over the place. But, with the ice and the restraints of the rink and things like that, that kind of make logistics a little bit weirder with hockey, where they kind of have to be on the same rink that's the same size with the boards that are the same, the same size, and the benches aren't going to get any bigger because then you're going to have to remove seats. And when people want to come back, that's going to be a whole, construction nightmare for them.
And not being funny, but then how does it work with something like line changes? Because like in the NBA, you can keep 5 people on a court and you're a coach. You say, hey, at this point, I want you to come in and so on and so forth. Whereas if with a line change, if you, let's say, double your bench space, you try to give people spacing, like how would something like that work? Because the line you might want together, like one person might be here, one person might be there, and another person might be there.
Yeah. Or they might be together, but on the wrong end, for the bad,
right.
The long change or whatever. You want them on one end of the bench and they're on the other end of the bench, or at least the other end of the set of lines or whatever. So yeah, there's a lot of logistics there. There's things that are hard to change. And we kind of were laughing about it in our private chat our Rink private chat with all of our writers about how they remove the glass behind the benches and stuff and arenas that don't have fans. I think it's just arenas that don't have fans, but how they were, and I'm like, I don't know if it's going to help. I don't know if that's the problem. I get what they're saying. Like you open up that airflow and you don't have people huffing and puffing in a glass box, or at least it's a glass box only on 2 sides rather than 3 sides. Like I get what they're trying to do. I don't know how much it's going to help though. I mean, it might not help at all, but again, at this point, they may have to take a short pause for a week and let things settle down a little bit. I don't know how they would even do that, or if they're just going to let this thing roll and just keep throwing games on the end of the season, or trying to jam them in the few days off that they have to make up these games. That's something I've had to deal with as a youth coach. I've had 5 of my games postponed, and this Sunday is supposed to be my last game of the season, and I've got 5 more games that I have to now figure out. They're going to have to figure out where they're going to schedule those games for these kids so that we get the required amount of games in. And it's a logistical nightmare for me and some kids. I can't imagine with arenas that need to be scheduled, and where is your opponent going to be able to come from where they were last or whatever like that, because that's a whole restriction thing. I know that geographically they're keeping teams in Canada, and they're trying to keep people on the East Coast and the West Coast, and then they have the Central, but geographically that doesn't necessarily mean the travel is going to really work out that well. And I think they're restricting traveling to like only the day of the game or something like that. They have some weird, so there's more layers to all of this that they're going to need to figure out, and they're going to need to rein it in before it gets out of control. Otherwise it's going to be real hard to find a way to finish the season with as many games as they plan on.
Or they're going to go and they're going to say, if the game is needed, they're going to play it. Or if it's not needed and the teams aren't in any chance of the playoffs, they're just going to scrap the game. And and you might have teams that get in all 56, I believe. And then you might have teams that only play 40 because they're in or 50 or whatever it is. I mean, yeah, other sports have done that. Like
it's going to be weird.
Baseball does that with rainouts and stuff like that. So
yeah, it's going to be weird. Anything else, Ryan, on the COVID thing? Or are you good?
I've got nothing more to add, guys.
All right, cool. I regularly have not much more to add. So I guess we could probably wrap this stuff up. I don't have any more extra plugs except for puckhockey.com, puckhcky.com. Get over there, use the discount code, the Rink, to get a percentage off on your stuff and free shipping and all that good stuff. Stay tuned because we're going to have some actual division specific merch that's going to be released there. And we're really looking forward to that. You can find all of our comprehensive content at www.the-rink.com. And we have our YouTube channel and our Instagram and all of our Twitter accounts and stuff like that. Ryan, you want to give where we can find your stuff and your Twitter account and stuff?
Sure. The Athletic. That's pretty much it.
Never heard of The Athletic.
And then as far as Twitter, Ryan_S_Clark.
Awesome. Cool. Thanks for coming on. We really appreciate it.
Of course.
Yeah, I hope we could have you on several more times, especially when there's actually some Kraken hockey related stuff happening. But yeah. Sean, how about you give yours?
My Twitter is Diesel, DIESAL 3426. You can find me on the Rink. I write about the Indy Fuel, the ECHL, and the Blackhawks, and I am on the Chicago Blackhawks Rinkcast, and we'll have a new episode out tomorrow. And I have heard of that app called The Athletic. I'm kind of obsessed with it. So.
Yeah, they knocked it out of the park, man. I was kind of worried because I loved Scott Powers, and he was like one of the founding writers that came on board, and I was like, when he left ESPN, I was like, oh, that sucks because this guy's really good. Like sometimes we have a hard time with writers being like, pitching what the organization is selling kind of thing. And it's not realistic. And Scott Powers has always been real and he's been really good. And even Laz, who I harass a lot, I used to harass all the time, but he was nice enough to come on our Rinkcast.
Fairness. Laz kind of brings it on himself. Like,
He does.
That's my guy. Like, I call him Pit, and he's like, I've never had someone make a Lazarus Pit joke. And I'm like, man, you've been hanging around the wrong people. But
For sure, yeah.
But no, that's my guy. I love him to death. But like when someone's like, I made fun of Laz, I'm like, he had it coming.
Yeah,
That's
I
reality. He had it
I
coming.
used to really go hard on Laz. I really did. I used to go super hard on Laz. But you know what? When it came down to it, I would kind of hate listen to his original podcast that he had. But when it came down to it, a lot of things he said were a lot of things we preach over at the rink, about the Blackhawks and stuff. So you couldn't deny that. And I put out a big surprise to everyone. I was like, we're going to have a surprise guest. You're never going to guess who it is, because we had professed our quote unquote hate for Laz. And Laz, I reached out to Laz. I'm like, hey, Laz, you want to come on? And he's like, yeah. I'm like, I promise we're not going to pull any funny business. Like, we're not bringing you on to slam you or do anything like that. Like, it's all good. It's on the up and up. We really enjoy you to come on. And he came on, and he was a good sport about it. And we had a good time, and we kind of patched things up a little bit. There wasn't really any hard feelings, but we kind of patched things up. And then I went on for one of their versions of their podcast. I designed their logo. So, I went on because I do graphic design and stuff. So I kind of, told Scotty, I'm like, hey, you want me to take a crack at your logo? Cause you need a logo. And he's like, yeah. And so for a little while, for the Laz and Powers thing, the LNP or whatever it was, before it went full athletic, I was the designer of that logo that looked like a record album. So anyway, that's neither here nor there. So with all that being said, if you can get over to iTunes, rate and review us, that would be great. There's not a whole lot of reviews or ratings just yet. There's a couple of them out there, and I want to thank the people that went out there and did that. Everything helps boost us up the ratings a little bit, so that when the season actually gets rolling, we actually have a solid fan base. And that's kind of what I'm trying to do here. So I know that we don't have a lot to talk about on the ice, but we have plenty to talk about, otherwise. And again, I want to thank Ryan for coming on. I'm sure we're going to have you on again. And Sean, thank you for coming on.
Of course.
Doing the little crosstown series here.
Yeah,
and,
for sure. Sure. Any excuse for me to wear my Kraken stuff, I'm game.
Awesome. Cool. And I want to give a shout out to the guys. I didn't get to say this. The guys at Kraken Crew. They sent me a little goodie bag with a flag and some stickers and stuff like that. So, and I sent them some Rink t-shirts, or a Rink t-shirt, and some Rink decals that we have here and stuff like that. So thanks to those guys. It's Kraken Crew _ after that. Brandon Seeley is the guy who runs it over there. So he was on episode 1, if you remember that. So with all that being said, thanks for taking time out of your busy schedules to download, listen, and support us. Until next episode, see you on the rink.